Welcome everyone to this joint BWP-QWP workshop on prior knowledge. My name is Veronika Jekerle. I'm part of the organizing committee of this workshop as well as the BWP scientific secretary. And I'm very happy to open this workshop today, which is a direct result of the BWP interested parties meeting we had back in 2016, where this topic was discussed, brought forward by industry and actually suggested as a workshop. So we're very happy that this is happening today. And we have with us many colleagues from the working parties. We have the BWP chair and also the vice chair, Dr. Ruiz and Dr. Goese, as well as the QWP chair, Dr. Pugh, and a number of BWP and QWP members around the table. We also welcome the industry representatives, both from small molecules and biotech arena, and we're very happy to say that we have Big Pharma and also SME represented today. We are also broadcasting this workshop to the public, and we're expecting more regulators in the national competent authorities, as well as other industry representatives to watch. We're also welcoming the EDQM, who is on the broadcast with us, and we also have a representative from the NIBSC here today. So I would like to take the opportunity to thank the organizing committee for the hard work over a couple of months to put together this very ambitious agenda today. Work started earlier in the year between the BWP and QWP, and then we invited industry stakeholders to join, and we're very happy to have a broad representation from EFPIA, EBE, Medicines for Europe and Vaccines Europe to have joined this organizing committee. And finally, before I hand over to Brian, I just have to remind you of the fire arrangements. There was a little video that was playing before. So in case of a fire alarm here at the agency, you follow EMA staff out of the building and there will be an assembly point over there. So with this, I'm handing over to Brian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veronika. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to EMA. My name is Brian Dooley from the Quality Office. The Quality Office in EMA supports the work of both the BWP and QWP. So what's on the agenda for today? Today we have an ambitious agenda which is divided into six sessions. The first session will be a general discussion on what is prior knowledge. Throughout the day we'll further elaborate on the concept of prior knowledge and its use in product development and design, its use in process development and manufacturing strategy, how to use prior knowledge in defining the control strategy. And then in the afternoon, we'll pull together the experiences from these three very technical sessions into a session on experience of accelerated access approaches, such as the PRIME scheme. And then hopefully by the end of the day, we'll be able to summarize our conclusions based on some productive discussions. So the format, each session will have a general presentation from a regulator and an industry perspective. Sessions 2 to 5 will be further elaborated by a number of industry case studies. And these include biotech, vaccine, small molecule and biosimilar examples. These case studies will then be followed by a group discussion. And what's key here is that audience participation is encouraged and expected. While the case studies will be quite specific in nature, the underlying principles of how prior knowledge can be identified, how it evolves, how its use can be justified and presented in the dossier is the same across all product types. So we're trying to encourage as much broad thinking around the use of prior knowledge and how we can see it potentially in the future in application dossiers. So with that in mind, we have 4 key questions that we want you to consider today. The first one is, what is prior knowledge, and also what isn't prior knowledge? How can such prior knowledge be used in regulatory submissions? How do you justify its use, and how do you present it in the dossier? We'll revisit these questions throughout the day. So during each individual session discussion and in the final concluding session, you'll see these questions come back on the screen. And this is to help focus our work in the workshop, that we can focus on some clear outputs. So the objective of this meeting really is to answer those 4 key questions, especially to highlight and identify points of agreement and points where there's disagreement, and from there to identify areas for further discussion. We intend to draft a meeting report that will summarise the presentations, discussions and conclusions, and will identify any next steps that we think appropriate. So in terms of practicalities, we have a very full agenda today. We have many presentations to get through. So I'd firstly ask the presenters to please stick to their time on presentations as much as possible. Myself and Veronika will remind the presenters. You'll hear Veronika's bell when you have a minute or so left to wrap up your presentation. Please return to the room on time after the coffee and lunch breaks to minimise disruption of the broadcast. There will be a 15-minute coffee break between the second and third session and between the fourth and fifth session in the afternoon, and a 1-hour lunch break from 1 to 2. When speaking, please always use your microphone. Please state your name and affiliation when you start to speak. And when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. With that, I'd like to welcome you again, and I pass the floor over to the chair of today's workshop, which is Mats Welin from the MPA in Sweden and a member of BWP. Mats.
Thank you, Brian. No, I think we're all quite eager to have. This is a very, as Brian said, it's a very loaded, full-loaded program, and I think it will be really interesting discussions. So maybe we just get ahead, and we will start now with some general input, and then we, as Brian said, we will come back to the more specific issues on product process development and control strategy development, and also experience from accelerated applications. So, and this is, yep. So this is the basis where, at least where I'm coming from, to say that we don't need a product design or manufacturing process to be optimized in all to result in the absolutely highest purity, longest shelf life, etc., which is possible. But what we should do is that the manufacturing process should reproducibly deliver a product of an appropriate quality to ensure its safety and efficacy as determined in clinical trials over the complete shelf life. So this is where we are and where we start from. And in doing that and designing products, processes, and control strategies, we'll need to learn from the past. And this is where the prior knowledge come in, to avoid making the same mistakes over and over again. And for that reason, the prior knowledge is really an indispensable tool for taking the right decisions early on. And it is, even if we, I think we, even if we don't consider this, oh, now I'm using prior knowledge, we are, because it's there, we have learned it, so it's directly or indirectly on purpose and not always included in planning for new products, manufacturing changes. And what we are now coming into is that how can we use this kind of prior knowledge to lessen the burden of product-specific data at certain stages. And the use of prior knowledge is already identified in several EU guidelines. We have the drug substance guidelines from BWP is on process development, that saying that prior knowledge is an important factor, valuable tool, and process evaluation, that prior knowledge can be used as supportive information. We also have the QWP BWP drug product guideline on continuous process verification, that the number of for example, in continuous process verification will be influenced by a number of factors, including prior development and manufacturing knowledge from similar products and processes. And it's also in Q8, Q10, it's stated, and also like to point out here for the work that the ICHQ IWG did in some 7-8 years ago. That so in the training workshop, where it stated that prior knowledge may include internal knowledge from development and manufacturing, external knowledge, scientific and technical publications, and citations in filing, regulatory filings, internal company reports or notebook literature references, and also here no citation necessary if well known and accepted by this scientific community. And I think this is an important issue. We have what is textbooks knowledge and what is sort of proprietary, you could say proprietary prior knowledge within the company. There's also a number of good points to consider written by the same group where prior knowledge is addressed in several aspects for identified and documenting CQAs and CPPs, applying risk-based approach to assessment of suitability of control strategy, determining factors for DOEs, like how to set certain first principle driven models and how can it be used in that sense. The problem here is, again, it's there. This is exactly what we are going to discuss this meeting. Problem is we don't have any clear messages or guidance from this. It's allowed, but how to do it is not clearly stated. And I hope we can come to a little bit closer to that such a conclusion today. So we have a number of coming from this, there are a number of issues arising. That where do we draw the line between what is common textbook knowledge, which doesn't as such need to be it's there, everyone knows it, it doesn't have to be justified in a file, and what is proprietary prior knowledge, if you call it that way, which is could be more linked to platforms within a company or to certain publications and not that well-known documentation. And the main topic of this one, I would say, would be the latter category. And what needs to be documented in the file. And here, I think this is one of the main topics for this discussion, that both industry and authorities has the common understanding on what are the expectations here. How should it be done and where should it be put? And where we see it, at least the way I see it, is that it's replacing something. It's replacing a product-specific study in one way or another. And therefore, to me, it's reasonable to put it where that product-specific study would have been placed, and therefore, and justify that why this prior knowledge is applicable in this particular case and can replace the product-specific documentation. And I think this will be further discussed, but at least this is the way. We need to see the context, we need to see the justification of the applicability. And we have a risk. I think it's well worth pointing out that there is a risk-based approach to level of detail in process development. That, as we said, that it's always taken into account, whether it's on purpose or not. But and it's reasonable to say that we are not expecting, if a company comes in with a monoclonal antibody and have the standard purification scheme, we are not expecting them to justify the order this is run and so on. This is, and so the early development of a rough process can to a great extent be built on prior knowledge, I would say. when it comes to the more evaluation studies in small scale to set out the boundaries of the ranges, they need to be described more in detail, and we normally would accept data from the actual product, but in case you reference it to prior knowledge, these studies should be described and the acceptability justified. In the verification studies where you do your PPQ batches, the large-scale runs, we normally would expect these to be performed with actual product to verify that your development based on your prior knowledge still works with this particular product. And what is really, I think, what will be key issue is the extrapolation process, that the proof of validity of the extrapolation is key for the acceptance of the prior knowledge. So you can say within a platform, monoclonal antibodies, synthetic peptides, oligonucleotides, I think it is possible, we have seen it already, still needs some justification, like is all parts of the process run in the same manner, etc. It's more difficult when we come to different kind of products, and the example here is, for example, is monoclonal versus an erythropoietin or human growth hormone, which is both are recombinant, but they are quite different. I guess it's not as evident, but it could be possible for certain principal features, and may perhaps also be okay for process development, but likely need further product-specific evaluation data. And the coming over to the attribute criticality, and this all of these will be discussed in more detail in the specific sessions. But again, of course, it's a risk-based assessment. It will depend on the product, but we also need to justify that we need to take the indication and the posology into account, that if you have a once-in-a-lifetime product, the levels and the CQAs may not be the same as if you have a lifelong treatment. We have some agreed upon principles like C-terminal license are not necessarily requested. We know they don't matter. DNA was an issue 20 years ago. Now we can see it's removed, therefore we don't need to look for it in that detail. But we have case by case where you come to product-related substances and impurities. And then when we're applying for the accelerated scheme products, we will find ourselves in a situation where the submission of the MAA is done at the stage where you normally do your validation studies. So it will really be rate-limiting steps. And to what extent is it possible to rely on prior knowledge and small-scale studies to base an approval? And again, extrapolation need to be justified, but it's the same as the last picture. Need to be considered. We would expect perhaps that a broader batch-wise control is established until a more specific experience is gained. The use of protocols, ongoing continued process verification studies, I think can be very useful here, that the protocols could be based on small-scale data from actual products and prior knowledge from upscaling of transfer, etc., of similar products, and then these are formed into the validation protocol, and we can see that, okay, if it fulfills these limits, then it would be a possibility to base it on on a small scale data, but with protocols, and perhaps with very few large scale data. Master file has been discussed as part of prior knowledge in an application, and it's just putting there are some questions. If you use an active substance master file for a chemical active substance, is this a type of prior knowledge? Using an CEP for an active substance, prior knowledge is using a PMF, prior knowledge. I think it's clear that the use of master files will avoid redundant reassessment of the same documentation. But master file concept as such will not support the design of products, processes, and control strategy, which is, I think, the main topics of this meeting. So we can say, of course, that if you are talking in terms of an CEP or an ASMF, that prior knowledge from a contract manufacturer can be used in designing products if justified. But it's doing the same assessment one over and over again. It's not taking data from one product and project it on a new product. And what we need to say as well, that extended use of master file systems is, for example, excipients, packaging material, is not possible with current legislation. It's the last one. Even if identical to early submissions, that you need to submit it in a new MA. But if you have a good reference to which product the material already was submitted and assessed, this will minimize the need for redundant reassessment. I think this was the last one. It was. Thank you.
Thank you, Mats. We'll now hand the floor over to Markus Goese to take the industry presentation.
Thank you very much. I think I can also say on behalf of all industry associations that we are very happy indeed to have this opportunity today to do this workshop, an event that has been prepared for quite a long time. So we are all looking forward to having very good discussions today. Prior knowledge. So I have structured my introduction, and I really want to keep it brief because we all know we have a very dense agenda today, into looking what could be a definition of prior knowledge. Then we will look at what of such knowledge is applicable for my specific case and how can it be leveraged, something that will mainly be explored via the case studies today. Then a very obvious question is also how to convince others that this is justified, how to present it. I will provide you with some at least initial thoughts here. And then obviously the question, what can we all expect from today? So starting with what is it? It's probably all of this what we can see on the picture. It's textbook knowledge in a library. It's knowledge people have in their brains. Eventually also the knowledge a pharmaceutical company has in the way they are doing and manufacturing their products. But I think we want to further explore also this, what is it today? And we started also in the organizing committee to have a discussion about the definition of prior knowledge. And there were suggestions like knowledge you have from relevant own experience, from textbooks, from scientific papers. Is it any knowledge that is not specifically product related in the public domain or internally? And we even went as far as Googling what could be prior knowledge. And I found a very interesting definition. It's, for example, here total knowledge of an individual. I added here and or a company because this is what we have to think about as well as of now. So a quite interesting approach. But with this brainstorming, we quite soon realized there comes also a lot of challenges when we talk about prior knowledge. One of the biggest challenges is also where to draw the line. So I think everybody would agree that C-terminal lysine has a big significance, that it's basically a no-brainer to do sterilization at 121 degrees. So we do not have to revisit this. It's more or less part of an established system. But the question comes, where to draw the line? What is prior knowledge and what has to be further explored? Another challenge, and I think this is quite obvious as well, is it's a moving target. There's an evolution in the prior knowledge, and we could even go as far and call it a prior knowledge life cycle. And then another challenge, obviously, is, I think it has been mentioned before, the proprietary knowledge, linking back to previous products, and addressing questions like, for example, how close do you have to be to one of your former products to call something similar, based on prior knowledge considerations. So quite some challenges. And then another challenge, obviously, with everybody that is involved in regulatory submissions is also the question, what does go into the regulatory file and how can it be presented, how can it be captured? And hopefully we can have some good discussions there today. Mats has already mentioned the definition of ICH for prior knowledge, or at least the sources where prior knowledge is mentioned. I guess we all know here Q8R2. Prior knowledge is here, for example, defined as, or is mentioned that it can include established biological, chemical and engineering principles and applied manufacturing experience, and includes data derived from relevant prior knowledge, including platform manufacturing, can be leveraged to support development of the commercial process. So quite an interesting statement, but the question is, what does it really mean? And likewise, we have also in ICH Q10, we have reference to prior knowledge. Sources of knowledge include, but are not limited to, prior knowledge. It's in the public domain or it's internally documented. Again, it's recognizable that this is important, but I think in this workshop we want to maybe take it a bit further and look into more specific definitions if possible. So providing here some more thoughts on the what is it. If you look again at the internal knowledge from development and manufacturing, for sure it's historical experience based on similar compound. It includes information resulting from modeling, especially also modeling of historical data. It's the application of platform technologies. We will talk about this at in the last session. And it's of course also the knowledge from previous filings. Looking at the external knowledge, it's for sure it's reference to scientific and technical publications, including reference to literature in for example peer-reviewed journals. It goes even as far as making reference to vendors' data. So quite an extensive area here. And then obviously looking at the application of the established scientific principle point. It's engineering principles, chemistry, physics. It's also mechanistic understanding, for example, if you look at structure-function relationships. But again, the question is where to draw the line. So I have no answer here at the moment, but I hope we will get some answers in this workshop. I mentioned already, so the points number 2 and 3 here in my presentation, they will be discussed in the specific sections that we will have throughout the day. We will start with general considerations and then have quite a number of very interesting case studies. And of course, what I did, I had a look at all these case studies before the workshop, and I extracted for myself, but maybe also for you to raise your interest in what is expecting us today, some teasers from these case studies. And I was looking at the product design session, for example, where we look at platform technologies applied to monoclonal antibodies, how CQAs and CPPs can be derived, and that such a candidate molecule fit with the platform may not necessarily guarantee success. I think this is also a point that we have to be aware of. There is also the area, for example, of the product-specific or the product-specific monographs, and then discussing those in comparison to product class monographs. I think this is also an area where we could explore how prior knowledge could be captured in more general product class monographs. Then moving on to process development, I think we all agree or would agree on the fact that and also as Mats has said, even if we are not aware, we are using prior knowledge in the small and large molecule space for drug substance, drug product, and might be able to use it already to a certain extent to provide a rationale for doing less experiments as a company. But obviously we have to provide facts at the end also to the regulator that we are working in a well understood area from our perspective, and we can use these data to convince the agencies in the end to give us approvals for our products. I think everybody is also aware of the importance of small-scale experience these days and how we can leverage prior knowledge. They will also be further explored in the process development section. Then moving to the control strategy, also something, and it also reminds me of some discussions we had, I believe it's now 6 years ago, at the workshop on setting specifications at EMA. How do we apply prior knowledge for the control strategy? And at the moment, it's mostly limiting or the use of prior knowledge is most limited in assigning the criticality. So we have some outlooks in this session to the short and medium-term future, that we move the testing as far as possible more upstream, and also can reduce more testing, potentially reduce testing of some more historical items that have been tested, like residual DNA, HCP. And then also the long-term future, obviously, is that by providing this experience, we can maybe have more attributes be accepted as safe, and this being driven by prior knowledge, and thus potentially reduce the testing. And last but not least, but very important these days, the accelerated pathways. I think I'm also especially looking forward to this session where we can look into how prior knowledge can be leveraged in accelerated pathways, where we can have a bit more of flexibility. I think needed flexibility, looking at the sometimes very challenging timelines of these pathways. So all in all, I hope we have here come up as an organizing committee with a very interesting program. Last but not least, in my deck, I wanted to come back to the point of the how to convince it, how to present it. I think that's specifically a challenge for pharmaceutical industry, the way how can we present prior knowledge in an application. I would say at the moment there is no perfect way to do that, and we should probably think about how to do this better. So maybe, we all know the CTD format is a very useful format, but there's also sometimes limitations in the CTD format. And ideally, in having this opportunity of the dialogue like today, we could find ways of, better presenting prior knowledge in a dossier. We have had this point of the master file system already mentioned by Mats. I think this is something that we will come back today. I would say not only for the initial application. I think the use of prior knowledge and how to present it is also very important for variations. And how do we take forward the prior knowledge there? And obviously, as far as possible, also looking at some of the procedural challenges that come with this within the existing framework. And I think we don't have to go through the details here. So the master file will be one of the points being discussed. And if a master file system that is also used in other regions, or a further development of the master file system, if we might agree on the fact that this is not possible to go further in the EU, there might also be alternative existing mechanisms, and then we can have a discussion how this could look like. So, all in all, I'm also looking forward to this discussion around the way how to present prior knowledge in submissions, or better ways how to present this, and also at the end reduce a little bit redundancy in the work. I would say both from an industry as well as from a regulator's perspective, to be more efficient in the way we present it. So what to expect today? I think in summary, we would like to address what is prior knowledge concretely in the end, and I think all the sessions, all the subsequent sessions have this as their primary goal. And by doing this, we will look into what is prior knowledge and also what is not prior knowledge. I think this is also quite important sometimes to highlight what is not considered as prior knowledge. And one last request, I think this is more or less self-understanding. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, so please contribute actively, participate actively in the discussions, and let's make most use of this day that we have been working on for such a long time to make this happen, and I'm really looking forward to this possibility for exchange. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. I think we have time. If there are any questions at this stage you would like to raise, keeping in mind that the more detailed discussions maybe will be held in the other sessions, but are there any particular issues now? Yep, Frank.
So this is, can you hear me? Frank Tettel from Roche. Mats, I have a question maybe for clarification. You were talking about the extrapolation and the proof of validity that we have to perform to apply the prior knowledge somehow. And then in the sub-bullets you were talking about that we need justification to apply it. Maybe for me that's a little bit confusing because proof of validity is a very strict and hard requirement, but justification is somehow different. Maybe can you comment on this one a little bit more?
I think what's intended is, if we have an example that company come with a claim to say, oh yeah, this is another monoclonal, and therefore we can use the same. If you don't submit any data to justify that extra the possibility to extrapolate, then that is we will ask you for that. But if you can provide us documentation that okay, yeah, this claim was already. We had 10 monoclonals in our back pocket. We had really good reasons to say this is similar to all of them. The chance that it is similar to the 11th one is really high. So therefore, it is a way of justifying that you can apply this to it without really having. You can draw conclusions from it, and I think that is what it is. Whether how tough you should interpret it, but that's the intention, that we need to understand that you can really do this extrapolation, and yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mats. Ronald Goese from Pfizer. Just following up on that comment, I think, a little bit. Fascinating two presentations from yourself and Markus. Lots of alignment, clearly, which is very hopeful for the day. I think one of the interesting things that you both said was this transition of when something goes from questioned prior knowledge into something that's well accepted by all stakeholder parties. I think that transition point is very fascinating to think about how that develops, and also to think about how industry can support that development. Does it need to be by dossier content? Can it be about the controls that are associated with it? Can it be about the quality systems associated with it? So not looking for an immediate answer to those rhetorical things, but just trying to put it in a holistic context, really, for this morning's discussions. Sorry for not asking a question, Mats.
No, but it's a good point, and I think as Markus said, this is a running target because it's a moving target because what we considered as well-established things 15 years ago, or which was not sort of common knowledge 15 years ago, is today. So we need to change this, and the way how to agree on what is now. This is now textbook knowledge. It's easy way to write it down, but it's more difficult to say really this will be acceptable by everyone. But it's a key issue, and I think with maybe I think Johannes, you have a point on this as well.
It's just a remark, not a solution, but rather a reflection also. What kind of prior knowledge also triggers our textbook knowledge or our change of scientific guideline? And just to remind, at least my personal understanding is that these guidelines are scientific guidelines. And scientific guidelines means that it's based on published knowledge. So whenever there is a company-specific or product-specific or master file-specific knowledge which is closed, I find it very difficult to translate this prior knowledge into change of a scientific guideline.
Stefan?
And sorry, another remark, it's not changing the scientific guideline. I'm also wondering what this will help for industry, because you might come to an agreement in a certain region with a certain agency. This does not mean that the other agency will accept it, and they will wondering why we have decided it way, and there's no common guideline to have an agreement worldwide also.
Steffen Groß, Patek Institute. I can follow up on that. Markus, you mentioned the public domain. Do you really mean scientific paper, that you can rely on scientific publications? Do you like to consider these ones?
I think it depends. It needs to be peer reviewed for sure, and like in many cases, it depends. I would say if it's a very reputable peer reviewed journal, there might be or there will be some good publications in there.
I think where we are now, we are more or less agreeing on C-terminal license, because we have seen it so many times. But it's building up. It's going after. But it will take time. But I think this is typically good to understand the expectations for certain prior knowledge. How much do I need to document it in the file, and what can I rely on others? And as you said, that if something is published, you can refer to that publication, but you may need to show the applicability of your product. But for the terminal license, maybe we do accept them as they are.
Thank you, Martijn van der Plas from Dutch agency. But I think C-terminal license are a good example, because I think that's at a certain point in time, a few years ago, one of your colleagues from Genentech, I think Reed Harris, took the effort to write down what he knew and what he had found on data on the C-terminal license in a peer-reviewed journal. So that's, I mean, for me, something that's not in a peer-reviewed journals are not sacred knowledge, so to say, but at least then you suddenly have a robust and transparent basis for your further discussions and decisions. And I think indeed that it would be helpful that if knowledge is, so to say, generalizable, that then indeed it's written down in peer-reviewed journals, so that at least everyone can access this information, and whether or not this is the final word and whether or not this is applicable to a specific case remains then to be determined, but it guarantees a level playing field.
One question over there.
Hi, thank you. This is Gustavo Marco from GSK. I just wanted to ask something in relation to some detail that has been discussed actually in both presentations. And it's because, for me, I think that in principle, the use of DMF type of process could be very useful in, for instance, situations where you have the same excipients or the same container closed system. And we've seen, and specifically, you might indicated that from a legal point of view, it would not be possible to extend the use of DMFs to those parts of the dossier. So, could you please elaborate a bit more as to what is the actual roadblock for this?
Yeah, the background for this, that we have the active substance master files for the small molecules, and I think we can all see a merit if we would have a master file system for packaging material, for certain constituents and certain other things. The reason we are not sort of, but I see it from two sides. This is the way we are now. We are learning something from one product. We are adapting that on another product, and with the master file, what we are doing is that we are simplifying. We don't need to reassess something, but to me, that's a different issue. And I think the reason we are a bit reluctant to open it up is that for the moment we don't see an opening. This may come in the future. This may be a wish from industry to the Commission that we would like more master files. This works well in the US, etc., etc. But it's as today we can't do too much on that. Even if we see the need or we see that it could be of use, we are not the one deciding on that because it needs to be in the legislation. So that is the reason, and I think we will come into a little bit also. I understand we have kind of master files for prior knowledge, and I think we will discuss that later on. But for the ones where you say, let's say for a small molecule where you have the same active substance in many products, then it's a good thing because you don't need to redo the assessment, of course. But we don't have these options yet, and therefore it's not meaningful to spend a lot of time with this heavy agenda on these topics.
Well, Mats is right. We don't have a DMF type of approach yet, but there's a lot of scope for cross-referring in terms of, if you think of container closure systems. As an assessor, for example, if I'm looking at a container closure system and I happen to know it's been used in another product, I'll go into that assessment, see what was done, what the questions asked, answered, is everything okay? So I'm using a type of prior knowledge there that I may happen to know, and sometimes I may not. But if the company explicitly stated, it's much easier to go, okay, let's see what's been done before. Yeah, I can agree it's similar. I can look at the assessment that was done previously. I'm happy with that assessment, so I can move on, so to speak. And it avoids you getting a lot of repeat questions or more questions. So I wouldn't be afraid to cross-refer, to explicitly state how exactly it's the same and what dossier was done, and it can help you guys and it helps us as well in our assessments.
Yes, maybe a last comment from Johannes.
Just also so one reflection is an issue I see with a master file concept is of course the prior knowledge has to apply it in a very product specific context, and I have some concerns that if it's too broad, done this master file concept, then you have a big accumulation of a big amount of data, but then it will be very difficult for the assessor to extract what data in this master file is really applicable for this specific situation. This might in fact also change. For example, a critical process parameter might critical for a specific product in a specific context, but if you have another purification scheme also, the same process parameter might also become less critical. So also this might change always in the context of a specific product. So we would wish really also to have a clear explanation of the relevance of the prior knowledge to this specific product. And I'm sometimes wondering whether a general master file concept can do this, because it's never filed for a specific product.